So we have our form displaying properly, and it appears to have client-side validation working really well because of this mounted lifecycle hook with this default JavaScript provided by Bootstrap. So things look good. We can go back over to our browser, and if I try to log in, I get the appropriate error messages. And if I put a valid email or something that's in an email form here, me@here.com, it turns green. And if I put any value in password, that's great. And we're using this, of course, with two nested components and a little bit of HTML down here, all inside the form tag component. And that's great. But what happens when we click on Login? Well, in a typical web application built using vanilla JavaScript and vanilla HTML, you would do one of two things. Either clicking Login would actually post this form data using a standard post request, or clicking the Login button would fire off some client-side JavaScript that does the authentication in the background using, say, a fetch call, a normal JavaScript fetch call or something like that. And of course, that's the approach we're going to use because what we're building is really a single-page application. It doesn't look like it because we can navigate around here, but this is really a single-page application, or a SPA as it's often called. So of course, if we go back to our code now and we look at the login view right here, we have our template that renders the form, and then we have this input type equals submit. And of course, we don't really want to submit the form as you would on a standard HTML page. Instead, we want to fire off some JavaScript. So what we'll need to do is add something to this form tag. And what we're going to have to add is an @myEvent. And that myEvent is not a variable necessarily. It's an event, and I'm just calling it myEvent. I can call it whatever I want. It's an event that we're going to fire from somewhere else in our code that this component will then listen for and then perform some action. And what we're going to perform is, and I'm going to call my handler, submit handler, like that, which of course doesn't exist yet, but we're going to have to make it. So we've added this @myEvent, and that could be written this way as well, v-on myEvent equals, so this is just a shorthand for the same thing, the v-on directive. Now, of course, this means we're going to have some kind of method named submit handler. So I'm going to come down here where I define my JavaScript, and after my components, I'll just put in methods. And I'll put a comma here so we don't get a JavaScript error. And the one method I need at the moment is one called submit handler. Submit handler, which I have to spell right. Handler. And it's a function. And all I'm going to do here is say console.log submit handler called success. Just so I know it's been called. And the other thing I want to do here is I need to get the values from this form. So I have two. I have one named email and one named password, okay? So what I'll do as well is I'll actually put a data handler in here, a data function. Data. And again with the comma so I don't have my syntax error. And I'll define two pieces of data. So I'll return, I'll call the first one email, and it initially has no value. And the second one is password. And it also initially has no value. So now that I have some data here, we can go back up here, and I could actually bind these inputs to that data. So v-model, which we used a long time ago, and this is going to be called, or bound to email. And down here, I'll bind this one, v-model, that standard directive, and I'll bind that to password. So now these are all bound to each other. And that's a good start, but we still have a bit of a problem. When I receive this event submit handler, I have to generate it from somewhere, and I still don't want the form to actually try to do a standard HTML post request. So there's still some more work to do, and we're going to do that, or at least part of it, in the form tag. And we'll get started on that in the next lecture.